We are at the 2011 Busan Gyeongnam KOTESOL conference with two presenters from the very first time slot, Joanna and Lyndon. First of all, what were your presentations and how did they go?
My presentation was about objectives and oral assessment, and I think it went pretty well. Yeah.
Joanna?
My presentation was on influence on learning from a goals project I did last semester.
So tell us a little bit about your presentations. What were the thesis?
Well, my presentation was about having objectives while giving examinations, focusing on mastery of certain grammar, practical skills like having a conversation, and strategic.
Is this focused on conversation?
This is conversation, yes. It was a conversation assessment, specifically, yes.
And so what the objectives you would give are?
Well, certain vocabulary for each chapter. Like we were focusing on family and relationships, Unit 4, so they would have to know all the different kinds of words for family and cousins and the grammar. Questions about that. Do you have any family members? And that would be the mastery objective for that.
One of the things you mentioned in your abstract is a lot of times conversation teachers feel the necessity to keep things active and alive and lots of energy and be a little bit of an entertainer, and that doesn't always support objectives. How do you find that balance of focusing on objectives but still keeping things... Because one of the challenges of conversation is getting their attention and making them comfortable speaking in groups or even partners.
Well, I find you just have to develop a task that is involving for the students and also something that reflects the objectives that are in your syllabus, and that can be very difficult. And then you want the midterm or the final exam to reflect what they've actually learned in the day-to-day classes.
So talk a little bit about the assessment. How do you do midterms or finals differently than you might have in the past?
Well, when I was teaching in the high school in Epic, I really didn't have a midterm or final. So, but we did have. I did give out a speaking exam, and it was basically I asked the students a few questions, and they answered, and I was like, "Oh, that sounds good." And that was it, because they weren't really graded. It was just for fun. At my university, we required students to actually have a conversation and to show the grammar they learned throughout the semester. So, like in my current course, we might be focusing on hobbies and a simple present adverbs of frequency, or telling a funny story or a strange story while using past continuous and simple past, contrasting. And so they would have to hold a conversation, start a conversation, small talk.
So they would have to have a conversation with each other?
With each other, instead of like me asking them questions. Pair work. Or groups of 3.
We were just speaking with Andrew Cook about that, and he suggested something very similar, because he was saying when it's teacher-student, it tends to be more of an interview, not a real conversation.
Exactly.
One of the issues there is, what if your partner is not very good? How do you adjust for that?
Well, we have a rubric to reflect conversation sharing, and if a student is actually dominating the conversation, it hurts both of them, but there's also individual there too, so they would get assessed on their grammar and their vocabulary and their listening and their command, and the other person would be penalized for their lack of grammar, vocabulary, and conversation sharing.
Now, do you teach conversation, Joanna?
No, not right now.
Have you?
Yes.
Did you have objectives, or were you just an entertainer?
Well, the main objective is that I'm not talking and the students are every single class, and they do it within either pairs or in groups, and I always try to add some presentation components so they stand in front of the class and kind of get rid of that public speaking fear.
Which segues nicely to your presentation. Tell us a little bit about what you presented about.
Well, my presentation was based on some research that Kristen Dalby did on autonomy learning, and she did a goals project for her students, and I found it very inspiring. I decided to apply it in my program. Last semester I taught something very different from what I'm doing right now. I taught first and second general English courses at Busan National University, and we had to use a textbook. We used the Ventures textbook. So all the people teaching first and second year English had the general textbook. We had to do the general parts of the course that were a bit of writing, reading, and grammar every single class.
What textbook was this?
Ventures. Okay. And it was just, I wanted to do something else outside of just the textbook. but that was continuous and lasted, several weeks. So I did it over 6 weeks and made my students work on these goals. And basically what it was is they had an option of doing either vocabulary, work on songs, movies, TV shows, do their own research, or keep a diary. So I gave them samples of what Kristen did in her work, but I told them that they were not limited to that. They could, do it in with a different angle. And
I'm sorry, there's the category. Let's say they choose, okay, my goal is vocabulary. Is there an option of different projects they can do, or is it totally up to them?
Well, I gave them the example of what the students did, which they just came up with different words and wrote the meanings of them. And I told them that they didn't have to focus on vocabulary from a textbook, or they could do different items. And some actually listened to songs and picked vocabulary from them. Some actually chose vocabulary from computer science or chemistry that they were studying. So they were actually studying for their actual subjects at the same time studying for my class. But I wanted them to write the meaning of these words in their own opinion. And some students actually kept diary logs of their vocabulary, where they cut out pictures that represented the meaning or drew diagrams, and then they would write about that vocabulary word. Some use really small notebooks, and so that way they could use them on the subway or when they were commuting. So really depending on the project, but basically what happened, my main question was, how do you think this is going to help you learn English by working on these projects? What is your plan? How often do you think you're going to work on this? And these were several different questions. I made them answer and write an essay at the beginning of the project. So they had a motive, they had a focus, and they knew exactly what they were doing. And if they didn't, after reviewing that essay, I realized, well, no, you're not going to watch 2 movies a week. That's way too much. And I would help them figure out to make sure they're going to be on the correct path while they're working on the project. And after the 6 weeks, I made them write an essay. Was this a positive or negative experience? And do you plan on working on this in the future? And the majority of everybody said it was a positive experience. Maybe 10 out of 95 students said they're not going to work on it, and so the rest said they would. I'd actually love to follow up to see, are they actually doing it or not? But at least the motivation was there. So
I like the title of Kristen Dalby's work that you mentioned in your abstract, How to Get Students to Want to Work.
Right, exactly.
And that's hard. And especially where you give them a project that there's a lot of autonomy involved. You're not saying, okay, I want you to do A, B, and then C. Some students will take the ball and run with it. I think a lot of them have issues if there's not real clear objectives and goals. How do you overcome that?
I don't give very strict rules. I leave it open, and I tell them I want to see your creativity. And because I had different levels in my classes, I had some students that really wrote 3-page essays on their reviews of articles. In other words, and other students would write very short, 2-3 sentences about comments about TV shows or whatnot. So this way, the ones that really want to put in extra work or want to challenge themselves and show off and what they can do or their passions, they had that opportunity. And the ones that were limited, well, at least they put in the effort that they had to.
Because that's another component of conversation or almost anything you teach here is the different levels. Mm-hmm. You have a lot of students. And how do you deal with that in terms of objectives when you have a class full of different levels?
Well, the university kind of handles that for us. Our students take a level placement test before they actually start their courses, and I teach one level throughout with 3 different courses. So after they take that test, we just basically assume that they're pre-intermediate. And it does a pretty good job at it. I've only had a couple students out of 150 who have really cannot handle the load in our conversation. I mean, the grammar and the vocabulary that they're expected to know once they leave the course. So the level placement test and the teachers who designed that before me really helped out in that regard.
So were any issues raised during your presentations? Any questions that gave you food for further thought?
I had a lot of great feedback because I actually made each participant that showed up at the presentation go through the students' work, find comments and sentences of where the students felt they showed some motivation, and then everyone just kind of gave their feedback on it, and most people were surprised that the students would actually go this extra length and find a passion in what they were doing and find pleasure in it. So,
you know, a big part of this kind of project work is audience. Was there an audience for their projects outside of the classroom? Was it published online or anything like that?
what do you mean?
These projects that they did, was it published? Did they do it on a blog? Would that be a possibility in the future, you think, or?
Definitely, that could be like the next step.
Yeah. About my presentation.
Any issues raised?
Well, I when I was doing my workshop about different kinds of objectives, coverage, activity, involvement, and mastery, it did seem like I was attacking certain activities. I wasn't doing that. I was just trying to get to incorporate clear-cut objectives into those activities. Activities are great.
Attacking activities as far as not being a good idea? Or?
Well, activities that might not have clear-cut objectives. What do you want students to actually accomplish here? Like one of the tasks that I gave was a PowerPoint presentation about family, and this is like be creative and bring all this in, but there was no clear cut what I expect them to know or like exhibit and show me, and that I was saying this was heavy on involvement, getting students engaged in the activity, but is
that a valid objective?
Involvement?
Yeah, getting students involved in a conversation.
It's very important. It's very important.
But you're suggesting it should be a more specific objective of
it needs everything.
This.
It needs everything. And you need to get students involved in it. You need to get them to cover the material that you have in the syllabus. You need to get them to master certain forms and structure and show the vocabulary. And they need to, what's the other one? Involvement, coverage, mastery. And you need a well-designed activity to do all those kinds of things. So, but I was just saying, activities are great. You want to have tasks, but you want to actually see students accomplishing something that they learned. The forms.
Any final words or thoughts about your presentations or anything else?
Yeah, I think my main goal in all my classes, no matter what the content I'm teaching, is to build confidence in my students and to get them to become motivated in an English environment, regardless of what specific topics they're learning. So this activity kind of let them do things outside of general English and pick items that they find some kind of inspiration from. And in the end, I was actually very proud of my students and surprised at what a lot of them came up with. And I'm hoping to take this on a different angle in the future.
How will you tweak this in the future?
Well, now I'm teaching more special content. So I'm teaching trade classes and tourism classes. So I want them to kind of do it more of a practical format and keep logs of real work that they're doing out there. My world economics students are actually doing real trade. They're importing products from the States and they're arriving in Korea, and then they're going to try to sell it. So I'm adding a lot of practical components.
What kind of products?
We're working on seafood and hiking material.
And they're actually doing it?
Yes.
Cool. All right. Well, maybe we can include a little commercial for their product if you want in the post of this. Speaking of which, video from both presentations should be online at koreabridge.net/KOTESOL. Thank you both very much for speaking with us, and we'll look forward to seeing you next conference.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you very much.